This is a story that sounds not like a news story, but only like a parody that we would expect to see on Saturday Night Live, but it appears to be all too real. Donald Trump reportedly gave German Chancellor Angela Merkel a bill for 300 billion British pounds, the equivalent of 378 billion US dollars, when they recently met to cover contributions that Trump believes are owed to NATO by Germany. We've talked about the prior embarrassments that we knew about from Donald Trump's absurd meeting with the German Chancellor, where he referred to the United States as a company, refused to shake Angela Merkel's hand during a press photography moment in the Oval Office, called a German media outlet fake news without evidence. And we now have learned that he did something even more outrageous. Donald Trump made the demand for 300 billion British pounds during private talks when they met in Washington, D.C., as being reported by the Sunday Times. There's a German minister who's describing the reported move by Donald as, quote, outrageous. And I have to agree with that. Now, if you're wondering, David, what is this even about? A bill to money to NATO? What are you talking about? NATO countries pledged 3 years ago to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. And only a few countries are actually doing that, right? The UK, Greece, Poland, and Estonia. The sum being demanded by Trump is basically backdating to 2002, the year that Angela Merkel's predecessor pledged to spend more money on defense. And Trump reportedly urged his aides to calculate how much German spending fell below 2% over the last 12 years and then added interest. Donald Trump also tweeted about this, sort of indirectly, saying, despite what you have heard from the fake news, I had a great meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Nevertheless, Germany owes vast sums of money to NATO, and the United States must be paid more for the powerful and very expensive defense it provides to Germany. Now, Ivo Dalder, who's the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, responded on Twitter explaining that Trump basically doesn't understand anything. He sent out a tweet shortly after this saying, "Sorry, Mr. President, that's not how NATO works. The U.S. decides for itself how much it contributes to defending NATO," and going on to say, "This is not a financial transaction." You can see a second tweet at the bottom of the screen. "This is not a financial transaction where NATO countries pay the U.S. to defend them. It's part of our treaty commitment." The unnamed German minister who commented on this also added, quote, "The concept behind putting out such demands is to intimidate the other side. But the chancellor took it calmly and will not respond to such provocations." Pat, what I would give to be a fly on the wall when Trump is directing someone to do this, can you imagine the conversation? Some aide walks into the Oval Office. Trump says, "Hey, can you print out an invoice to Germany for NATO contributions?" Mr. President, you mean like go to accounting and have them formally invoice? No, 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 just a fake invoice. It should just look like an invoice, and I'm going to hand it to her. A fake invoice, Mr. President? Yes. For NATO contributions to Germany, Mr. President? Yes. And what should it say? Just 300 billion pounds.
So from the U.S. perspective, I think this just kind of comes across as an embarrassment. But if you look at the more German perspective, I think this is kind of reminiscent of the Treaty of Versailles, which essentially blamed the costs of World War I on the German people. And they had to pay, I think, up to like $500 billion in today's money in reparations. So, I mean, to place all the blame on them for these back payments that they owe to NATO, it really just shows a lack of perspective in German history.
Yeah, I would bet that Donald Trump is not familiar with the ins and outs of the Treaty of Versailles. Right. So Germany may be aware of situations where historically they've actually had to pay up for certain things. And a fake invoice from Trump is not exactly going to cast the fear that maybe Trump wanted on Angela Merkel.
I'm just saying I think it's important to look through the eyes of a German citizen when you make these moves.
Why does no one in the Oval Office just put their foot down and say, "Donnie boy, this is a bad idea. We're not doing it"? Former Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, Robert Reich, said, "Trump is an international embarrassment," to use the term that Pat just used, "to our allies around the world. He doesn't represent most Americans, and we're doing all we can." This made me cringe. I mean, a fake invoice to the German Chancellor for NATO spending. I actually like that Angela Merkel is just ignoring it and not even taking it seriously. That's unfortunately for the U.S. a growing attitude of foreign leaders and diplomats, which is basically just acting as if Trump is a little kid and ignoring him completely. The risk, though, Pat, is that when you ignore megalomaniacs, they will do unhinged things to get attention. And Trump does have access to the nuclear launch codes. That's my concern. Trump should be ignored. But you got to be careful when you ignore the megalomaniac.
That's always a concern. And remember, I mean, Trump as a businessman was considered kind of as a con man, Trump University first and foremost. So I think he was just used to be able to get away with this.
I like that. Trump was kind of considered a con man. Yes, Trump was a total and absolute con man, and many of the deals he claims to have negotiated, he didn't actually negotiate himself. So just cringeworthy, truly cringeworthy embarrassment.